Time traveling is the stuff of many fantasies, all of which are in the realm of science fiction, right? Well, what if the possibility of time travel is real scientific fact? Better buckle up for things visible and invisible. Dr. Eric Wargo is a science writer and editor in Washington, D.C., but in his spare time he writes about science fiction, consciousness and the paranormal at his popular blog, The Nightshirt. His published works include Time Loops, Precognition, Retrocausation and the Unconscious, and his latest work is entitled Becoming Time-Faring, Time Travel and the Human Future. And he joins me down the line from his home in Virginia. Dr. Eric, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Eric, time travel for my generation, I have to say that time travel sort of blighted my childhood. And the person who did so was by the name of H.G. Wells, who died not far from where I'm speaking to you tonight. You're probably familiar with his book, The Time Machine, which is a pretty depressing read. And you're also probably familiar with the popular cult classic, The Time Machine from the 1960s, the movie, which really did send everybody to bed miserable. Why should we be interested in time travel?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. H.G. Wells, he was a pioneer in all kinds of ways, but The Time Machine, yeah, it is a bit of it's a very depressing read. It was not intended, oddly enough, as a prediction of future science and technology. H.G. Wells didn't believe in time travel at all. He was using this vehicle of travel into the far future as a kind of social experiment to talk about human degradation and the degradation of civilization. And if you'll recall, at the end of the novel, our far future descendants are crabs, crawling along this depressing post-apocalyptic nightmarish landscape. And so he was, using this, he really was just creating a sort of literary trope, honestly, but it was a very prescient one because he was the first writer or the first thinker really to say that the fourth dimension, the time, is the fourth dimension. Now, at the time he was writing, in Victorian England, there were lots of people thinking about higher dimensions, fourth dimensions. This was actually a really popular subject, oddly enough. And you may have heard of the novel Flatland. This was by Edward A. Abbott. He was I think he was a clergyman and a mathematician, and he wrote this fable about a two-dimensional world being visited by a three-dimensional being, and he was trying to get people to imagine that our world, our three-dimensional world, might just be, part of a larger four-dimensional universe. There were a lot of people thinking in these terms in Victorian England. H.G. Wells was the first person to take this idea and say, but wait, maybe time, that's the fourth dimension. And lo and behold, 10 years later, 10 years after he published The Time Machine, Einstein published his first paper on special relativity, which essentially established, yes, that time is the fourth dimension. So it was a very prescient work, even though Wells himself wasn't really intending to make some sort of scientific innovation with his story.
But do you find, Eric, I mean, your researches are fascinating, but there's a kind of cultural parallel, cultural forces are in parallel with things that are being discovered or explored in the scientific realm. I mean, this isn't something peculiar to the end of the 19th century. I mean, we've seen this in our own century, in the 20th century, where sort of people talk about things. I mean, for example, I grew up watching Star Trek, which I know isn't about time travel, but you probably remember whenever the Captain Kirk and the crew would take out their little visor type things and talk to each other. Well, we've got mobile phones now doing exactly the same, you know? So there's a way in which science fiction is often predicting things or as you say, looking to the future. But time travel is something which has fascinated the human mind outside the realm of science fiction. People have often talked about what it would be like to go back in time. This is not something peculiar to our time or our age. Where do you think this comes from? Where do you think this kind of desire, this deeply human need to think about the past or to travel to the past or to travel to the future?
Well, there are a lot of answers to that. I'll cite another science writer, a much better science writer than me, actually, James Gleick, famous science writer who wrote a very good book on time on this very topic a few years ago, Time Travel, it's called. And he argues he doesn't actually believe in the possibility of time travel, but he argues that it emerges as a function of regret. We all regret choices that we've made that turned out poorly, that we wish we had done things different. We all, mourn the loss of loved ones that we wish we could go back in time and be with again or save from some, tragedy or whatever. So that there's that desire to change history that is implicit, I think, in a lot of stories about time travel, a lot of fictional stories about time travel. So that's maybe where that urge comes from. Um, but there's also, I think, where James Gleick, I think, missed the boat a little bit in his book was that he didn't really believe in the possibility of time travel. But I think we need to face the reality that it is probably going to be possible and probably is going to be a reality. And so, how is that reality going to be different from our kind of fictions and our wishes about changing the past?
Before we get to the possibilities, which is very, very intriguing thought, can I just pose a question, Eric? Which I mean, if you've seen the film Back to the Future and you've seen the problems that can occur when you start messing around with time, it's a kind of funny play on something which is often cited as one of the problems with time travel. To go back and change things means that the present is altered. I mean, how do you philosophically get around this idea that monkeying around with the past will always lead to problems in the present, to say nothing of the future?
Well, that's actually false. This is really interesting that science fiction writers have like grasped onto this idea that traveling to the past will somehow change the past and then, lead to an altered present, and then you have the ultimate version of this is called the grandfather paradox, where you get in your time machine, you go back and you kill your grandfather, or else you prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, and thus you prevent yourself from being born. And then, well, who then could go back in the time machine and so on, and smoke shoots out your ears when you try and reconcile this. Um, but the reality is, and physicists have actually determined this mathematically. The reality is a time traveler is perfectly allowed to go into the past and do things in the past and cause effects in the past. And those causes will always be part of the backstory of what led you to get into the time machine in the first place. So that in fact, there is no such thing as the grandfather paradox. There is simply no backstory to a time traveler going back in time and killing their grandfather. That just can't happen because it didn't happen. But the thing is, there are no rules in the universe preventing a person from traveling in time and doing all kinds of mayhem in the past. But it will turn out that mayhem, whatever mayhem they committed in the past, is already part of their history. Maybe they didn't know it, but they will find out that it was true.
That's a really interesting way of squaring that circle. However, there's another problem. Well, not a problem, but there's another interesting concepts we're playing with here, which is that the past, the present, and the future somehow exist alongside each other, which you and I know, certainly in the West, Eric, the ideas of a linear history, right? You know, that something happened then and then something happened then, and then we're heading towards, this is outside kind of our understanding that these parallel entities, time zones, if you like, are running alongside each other. So to time travel, by necessity, you have to have somewhere to go, either back or forward. So how do you square that one?
Well, I don't need to square it because Einstein did it for me. At the again, early in the 20th century, Einstein's relativity theory. One of the huge implications of it is that time is a dimension, just like space is a dimension. And his math teacher, Hermann Minkowski, is the one who sort of kind of worked this out and gave us the term space-time continuum. And it's what that means is we live in what is really a four-dimensional, it's sometimes called a block universe. Imagine a big glass brick, and just pretend that two of the dimensions are space and one of the dimensions is time. In fact, there's three dimensions of space and one of time, and we can't visualize that. But imagine it. We and everything else in the universe are what are called world lines. We extend a certain distance through that block. And events in the future are already there in that block, in that space-time continuum. This is a mind-blowing implication of relativity theory, but it's actually not really strongly questioned by most physicists. It's basically just been accepted. We have a hard time, maybe even an impossible time conceiving of that. But what it means is that there is actually a future out there, in a sense, that already exists. And likewise, the past still exists in a sense and could be visited if you have the right technology. And there's nothing that prevents that technology. There's nothing that prevents that except for, technical feasibility. It's not currently within our technological capabilities, but it could be in not too long.
So just on that, Eric, because you've explained that very well, but are we to believe then that most physicists, basing themselves on Einstein's theory of relativity, are kind of, to use the modern jargon, cool about time travel? It's possible. It's theoretically feasible, so therefore it could happen.
They're divided. They're profoundly divided. They fall into two camps. There's the camp that thinks there's no reason it couldn't exist, but they don't want to talk about it because when you start talking about science fiction stuff like time travel, you can quickly get ridiculed by your peers and quickly get interviewed on on shady interview shows and lose their respectability. I'm not afraid of that because I'm not an academic, but and then there's another camp that they're so troubled conceptually by the idea of the problems raised by time travel that they'll try to find all kinds of reasons why it shouldn't work and might not work. And a number of famous physicists in history have taken that position, like Stephen Hawking is an example. He did not believe that time travel would be possible, but he sort of went through a lot of mental gymnastics to make the case. And as far as I'm concerned, he lost he lost the argument to other physicists who were able to sort of debunk his debunking. So
if it is a sort of theoretical equation possibility in the world of physics, why do you think certain physicists are sort of doing mental gymnastics to escape that possibility? What lies behind that, do you think?
This is a fascinating question, and I think there's a lot of, first of all, it's really hard to wrap our heads around the idea of time travel and reverse causation and all the things that are, all the implications of time travel are really headache causing. And I frankly think that physicists are not used to being challenged, frankly. They like to be, they like to understand things. And when they're faced with something that really messes with their understanding, they're happy to reject it, for one thing. I think there are a lot of cultural taboos too. I mean, we like to go, we like things to be linear. We like the things to progress in a single direction. Um, Maybe actually it's probably more than just a cultural taboo. I think it's probably intrinsic to our human nature that our brains work a certain way and want to understand the world a certain way. And time travel and things like reverse causation don't fit with the way we perceive the world. And so it's very hard to wrap our heads around this idea. So I think, yeah, there are those are some of the sources of resistance, I think. Well, that's a great question. To begin to build a time machine, you'd first have to secure a source of something called negative mass. Okay. Now, the problem is we don't know exactly where or how to get that yet. That's one of the big hurdles to actually building a time machine. But nothing, there's nothing theoretically, that prohibits the existence of such a thing. And it may be possible to create it in a laboratory at some point. We are not at the point yet of being able to travel physically in time. However, there's a sort of a halfway house to physical time travel that we are entering right now in our technological progress, and that is the ability to send information backwards in time or across
Really?
temporal dimension. And this is something that is emerging with the development of quantum computers. Quantum computing may allow messages to be sent across the fourth dimension, which is mind-blowing enough.
Mm.
Sending objects, but you can potentially send information across time. And that could be the stepping stone. Imagine combining that with, AI and so on. We may be able to create create wormholes or informational wormholes through time using quantum computing and bootstrap the technology to actually build physical time machines.
That's absolutely fascinating thought that we can send information into the past. I mean, in your researches, Eric, have you come across anything which makes you wonder if something in the past is an example of that? You know, that they experienced something, they saw something, they witnessed something that could have been a message transmitted from the future into the past.
Well, no one thing specifically, but certainly there are all kinds of, paranormal phenomena that have been reported throughout history
Mhm.
that have all the hallmarks of potentially representing some kind of time traveling technology or time traveling information. So, and there you're getting into obviously the whole UFO phenomenon because a lot of what has been reported um, uh, over the decades and over the centuries and millennia, really, uh, as that we now call UFOs or UAPs or whatever. A lot of it resembles what might be time traveling technology or time traveling, even visitors from another time. I mean, there's no way of proving that at this point, but it's certainly a one place to look. If we were going to look for evidence of real time travel, that would be one place to look, I think.
That's a fascinating thought. I mean, it is a theory around UFOs, which is which has been around for a while, that it is it's a sort of the dimensions of time and space are being penetrated in a sense, and people are coming from the future into the past. I mean, you're probably familiar with some of the historic accounts of UFOs appearing across the North American continent and newspaper reports, which are shockingly similar to some of the reports that we have from the late 20th century. I mean, are they the type of examples that you're thinking of where there may be that sort of penetration of a realm in terms of time?
Possibly. What interests me most, there's an anthropologist in Montana named Michael Masters who's actually written some good books on arguing that famous UFO cases, could be explained as time travelers. What interests me most is the physical behavior of these objects. Um, they often behave in ways that are very senseless to us, given our understanding of physics, Newtonian physics, and yet they actually match what a time machine might look like to
Really?
an observer. So, for instance, objects, like luminous objects that merge and disappear, or that like pairs of objects that emerge from nothing and travel in different directions. Those visual signatures are what a single time machine or a time ship, what I call a time ship, would look like if it was changing its direction in time, like throwing it into reverse in time. They would actually look like two objects converging and disappearing. Vice versa, if you were traveling backwards in time and you shifted back into forward, it would look like two objects emerging from nothing. These kinds of like bizarre visual displays that people report all the time with UFOs. Those are the kinds of things that you would expect with an object that was manipulating space-time and actually potentially traveling backwards in space-time. So that's what intrigues me about the UFO phenomenon in relation to time travel. I mean, we don't know enough. There's too much. The whole UAP UFO topic is very fraught with deception and untrustworthy people, and who knows what evidence is real and what's some sort of experiment being conducted by a aerospace firm or whatever. So it's hard to take one piece of evidence and say, well, this is evidence of that. But on the whole, you get lots of reports of objects behaving in these very surreal ways that are suggestive of things like time machines. Another one possibility for time travel actually is what's called wormholes. I mean, this is something that physicists have been talking about for decades. Um, and if you had an artificially generated wormhole, um, it would actually behave like if you generated a wormhole in a sort of laboratory chamber, for instance, and had, where one mouth of the wormhole was, at your lab on Earth in 2525, and you projected the other mouth into the 21st century, it would appear to an observer like from a distance, it would look like a convex object. It would look like a spherical or round object. But then when you got close, you'd suddenly realize, wait, no, you're inside something. And
Mm.
that strange passage from outside to inside is something we don't have of any kind of experience to base that on. But that kind of thing is reported all the time by UFO abductees. That kind of like strange transition, into some interior of some space that's different from where they were, but they didn't go through a door. That's the kind of thing that suggests that some of these experiences, not necessarily all of them, but some of them could represent some sort of time traveling technology.
If we take it, Eric, that physicists have shown that time travel is theoretically possible anyway, does that mean then that the boundaries between the past, the present, and the future are much more porous than we realize?
Yeah, 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 it means that, that fourth dimension is something traversable. We are traversing the fourth dimension all the time. We are going a single direction in the fourth dimension. But uh, you can think of it as going down a steep slope, and we can't imagine climbing up that slope because it's just too steep. But, given the right technology, we may be able to uh, ascend that slope. That is to say, travel into the past. Uh, and again, there's nothing theoretically in physics that should prohibit it. And there are people actively working on the problem of manipulating space-time. The most forward thinking in or some of the most forward thinking in physics, I'd say, is really trying to grapple with these problems of manipulating space-time in order to create things like warp drives and so on. And that's when you're talking about a warp drive, for instance, you're really talking about a time machine because you're bending or altering the space-time continuum in a way that really is essentially a time machine. So, there are people working on these problems right now. And of course, there are rumors that in the secret laboratories of aerospace firms, they've been trying to do this for decades and maybe have already succeeded. I don't know what to make of those rumors, but they're certainly interesting to think about, to ponder. So who knows what may already exist out there in the black world or whatever. But
Uh, I mean, what
I think this is something that's on the horizon, even if it doesn't exist fully, or even if we are not currently capable of it.
But I mean, in a sense, what you're talking about, though, as well, Eric, is challenging not just a worldview, but our sort of sense of what it means to be a human being. You know, that we're born on a certain time and we die at a certain time, and we move through history and the continuum, as you were talking about there, at a certain rate, and then that's it. And most people see it as a sort of continuum. There's also, I mean, you'll be well aware, there is a religious dimension to the idea of time, not just in Christianity, but in other religions. Now, other religions have different ideas of time, obviously, but in Christianity, it's very much a historical continuum to an end point. So the minute you start sort of playing around with time travel and the possibility of multiple times at the same time. Does this really mess with people's philosophical, religious ideas?
Probably in some ways, yeah, for some people. Although there are, even Christian thinkers who like contemplated something more like a kind of circular understanding of time. The theologian Teilhard de Chardin talked about an omega point at the end of history but people have kind of conceived of his idea as almost a retrocausal notion that maybe the end of history is the same as the Big Bang and that we're living in a big loop. The physicist John Wheeler really created this almost cosmology in which observers at the end of time, something like Teilhard, his omega point, are by observing the early universe actually create the early universe, and sort of it's this big kind of Ouroboros or big loop. This kind of this universe is a big kind of creative loop, and I don't think there's anything fundamentally anti-religious or theological in such a notion. I mean, I find it very beautiful, and I think it could certainly mesh well with many people's theologies or cosmologies.
But do you think, I mean, if I were to put you on the spot, Eric, I mean, would you, if we were sitting here tonight and we had a time machine, would you get into it? And which way would you go? Would you go to the future or would you go to the past?
Oh, that's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I would probably go into the past. I would probably go in the past. I don't like the way the world is going right now. I'm not super confident of the current direction of things, so I would probably throw it into reverse and
And
1970s of my childhood, which
1970s. All right. Okay. That would be fun. Um, But I mean, returning to H.G. Wells, where we started our conversation together, his travels, as you've alluded to, his travels into the future, sort of weren't the time travelers' travels into the future weren't very positive, and obviously what he found was a very dystopian world somewhere ahead. I'm just wondering if, yes, time travel might be possible, theoretically at least. Yes, at some point, somebody somewhere may find a crashed UFO and discover the antimatter or whatever they needed to create one. But there is a question mark as to whether we would want to do that. You know, this sort of philosophical idea that sometimes we have the potential, the power to do something, but it's probably better that we leave it well alone. I mean, is there anything in your researches around time travel that you've thought, maybe this is a subject that we should just leave to the realm of science fiction?
Well, yes, like a lot of scientific advances, such as splitting the atom, there's great potential for destruction, as well as great benefit. There's both potentials. And I think an argument has been made that research has been proceeding along these lines for decades, and that it's been kept very, very secret precisely for that reason, that it's potentially incredibly destructive. And I think that's possible. I mean, whether or not it's true that physicists in secret have made progress along these lines, there are certainly rumors that they have, but whether or not those are true, I think it's very likely that this kind of technology will be kind of in the secret world, at least initially. Because yes, there's so much potential for destruction, but eventually it will probably escape that secrecy, and there are potentially great boons that could come from time travel technology, and my hope is that eventually humanity will realize those boons.
Well, unfortunately, Eric, we have come to the end of our time continuum on this show. So tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can also pick up a copy of your fascinating book.
Yeah, my book, Becoming Time-Faring, is now available on Amazon, along with my other books. And you can find out about me at ericwargo.com. And I have a blog called thenightshirt.com. Yeah, and I'm on Twitter.
Wonderful. Eric, thank you so much for coming on Things Visible and Invisible.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of Things Visible and Invisible. We're dedicated to uncovering phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality, from ancient enigmas and paranormal encounters to scientific anomalies and forgotten histories. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysterious and unexplained, please consider subscribing to our channel and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on future explorations. Have a personal experience or story that aligns with our investigations? We'd love to hear from you. Visit our website at tvi.show and reach out through our contact form. While we can't feature every submission, we review them all, and your story might be featured in an upcoming episode. To support our continued investigations, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter or channel member. Your contributions make these explorations possible and give you access to exclusive content, early releases, and monthly behind-the-scenes discussions with our team. Don't forget to check out our merch store. We've got everything from TVI-branded t-shirts and hoodies to stickers and coffee mugs, perfect for showing your support while keeping the mysteries close. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time as we continue to explore the things visible and invisible.